Hi everyone, I'm Angie Komar from Train the Teacher, where I am a teacher trainer and course director on the Trinity Cert TESOL. Welcome to the lesson on how to teach writing in your English classes. A lot of teachers worry about teaching writing. They think that it's going to be dull or too challenging for their students. But if you scaffold a writing lesson enough, and be sure to incorporate other skills, students will feel supported in the writing that they do, are sufficiently challenged in order to make progress, and hopefully get some enjoyment and validation from their efforts as well. Before we start, let's think about writing as a skill. It's a language skill, of course, but it's also a physical skill. For young children, especially, the act of writing is a motor skill that they need to practice before they can even start writing letters, let alone words or sentences. We should also remember that writing comes after other language work and needs preparation. And it's more important that those learning to write can get across what they are trying to communicate than it is to use correct grammar, spelling, or to have perfect handwriting. So if we have a look at these steps for beginner writers, so for when children are first starting to write in English. Before we can even start thinking about writing, it's best to start off with something really simple, like getting the children to draw pictures. Or they can bring in photos, or you can provide some pictures from magazines, the internet, or whatever sources are appropriate. Children are likely going to draw pictures about themselves, their family, or their pets. Other things like houses and landscapes with the sun are also things that kids like to draw. So now that they've drawn their pictures, we can get them now to talk about the pictures, because it's likely that what they've drawn is going to be important to them in some way. Let the kids share their pictures and thoughts about those pictures with each other. It can be something as simple as, "This is my cat Charlie. He is black and very naughty." Talking about their pictures gives them a great opportunity to practice what they already know in English and builds up their confidence. And from what they've said out loud, you now have your content for what the children can write. However, for very young writers, you will probably have to do a lot of the writing for them at the beginning. That can just be writing down the sentences your students use to describe the pictures. Something manageable that they can do is to trace the words that you write. As they gain in confidence, students can start writing on their own under the pictures. It might just be 1 or 2 words in the beginning. That's okay, because this can gradually build up into a sentence. But the main purpose of this exercise isn't how much the children can write in English right away. What we are doing is capitalizing on the natural interest that children have in describing what they see. This in turn can encourage them to write communicatively about things that interest them. What's also motivating for your students of all levels is by giving them a real-life writing task. So something that you might have to write in everyday life. For example, a shopping list, a WeChat message, a postcard, or a birthday card. The practical nature of a writing task like this is motivating for the students because they can see how they can immediately put their English writing skills to use in real life. Another activity that can help students improve their writing is by giving them jumbled up words to put in order to make a sentence. Because writing whole sentences by themselves can be a little bit challenging, giving the students a word jumble can help them become more familiar with word order and also gives them a little bit of support. Each pair or group of 3 to 4 students can be given a set of cards with words on each card that form a sentence. They can put them in order and then write the sentence in their book or worksheet. Another activity. Students get the first sentence or the beginning of a story, and their job is to complete the story. They can be given really funny sentences or situations to make the task more fun. This activity encourages the students to use their creativity and gives them practice in creating a cohesive text. Using illustrations can help inspire our students to write in English. You can show them a picture with lots of things happening at the same time. The students can choose part of what is happening in the picture to write about, or they can write a story about the whole scene. Visual prompts help give our students a starting point, and so they have some guidance with content. This way, they won't stray too far from the topic. For any good writing activity, your students first need to be able to say what they're going to write. With the whole class, you can show the students what to do by modeling a writing example. A good way to do this is to draw a simple outline of an imaginary person on the board. Ask your learners to ask and answer questions about the person. This also gives them some agency over the details, which a lot of young children love because they get to decide on the name, the age, and what the person looks like, etc. Then, write the answers on the board. With these answers, show how they can become a written description, and how you can then organize the information when writing a text. Afterwards, you can choose and display the best or funniest texts that the students write. And here's a picture to show what we mean. You can also model what to write and how to write something based on an existing piece of writing. So you can give your learners a simple text like the one you see on this slide. Make sure that the text is at their level and is not too difficult for them to understand. At the same time you give them that short piece of text, give them some comprehension questions to answer once they've read it. Ensure they've read the questions before reading the text so that reading becomes a much more active process because they're actively looking for the answers to those questions. These questions have two functions. First, they let you see whether the students have understood what they've read, and second, they provide them with the content that they're going to need to later recreate the text. You can then give the students a template that looks something like this. The answers to the comprehension questions they answered earlier helps them to fill in the blanks. For more advanced learners, of course, you can see if they can recreate the whole text without a template. What we looked at just now is an example of what teachers can do with a model piece of writing. In addition, you can also ask them to memorize and reproduce a short text. This can either be as identical as they can manage, or you can implement some form of substitution. For example, turning the text from third person to first person. A more controlled activity could be some kind of gap fill, or reordering the sentences, or adding sentences. Learners need to read widely in order to develop their writing skills. Children spend a long time reading and analyzing examples before they can produce something similar. Using writing models helps our learners to understand and be exposed to different types of writing, and they can use that to guide them in their own work. Teachers, you can write your own models for the students to use, and later, examples of excellent texts written by the learners can in turn be used as models for their peers. Teachers can also model the actual writing to guide them step by step during the whole writing process. So how can we scaffold model-based writing? And by scaffolding, we mean providing the learners with support in order for them to effectively complete the task. They should have a checklist which will help them to include particular features in their own writing. And they should also use self or peer assessment questions so that they can assess their own or their partner's abilities and help them identify ways that they can improve what they've written. We'll look at those questions on the next few slides. So here are some examples of self or peer assessment questions. Does the writing include full sentences, appropriate use of capital letters, full stops, adjectives, interesting verbs and vocabulary? Has it included lots of details? With each of these, they can be highlighted in different ways, such as being circled or using an actual highlighter or colored pen. Some further self or peer assessment questions could include how detailed the piece of work is. Does it include information about what you can see or hear or how the writer feels? Can you imagine what you are reading about easily? Can the description be improved? If it is self-assessment, the writer can analyze what they have done and make sure the appropriate details have been included. If it's peer assessment, the writer and the helper can discuss these details together. A big reason why some students get so paralyzed by the idea of writing is that they worry so much about creating accurate language that their fluency suffers. We want them to overcome this fear, so it's important to help them develop their written fluency. We can help them do this by giving students as much control over what they're going to write about and how. Writing from their own experience or about their own preferences is always going to be easier because it's personal and interesting to them. So they can write about their favorite hobby, food, festival, etc. So it's good to occasionally give our students free writing tasks to help them develop their written fluency. Tell them they have 3 minutes to write as much and as quickly as they can about a topic that they can write about from a personal standpoint, such as my town, or my funniest memory, or what I did during the Spring Festival. The idea is to increase how many words they can write within that time limit. Tell them not to worry about grammar or spelling. The only rules are that they should not erase anything they've written, and they shouldn't stop writing until the time limit is up. After you tell the students, "Time's up," the students can count how many words they've written in those 3 minutes. Record the number on the sheet. And, this is important, get them to swap their work with another student and to read each other's. They should try to make some kind of comment in response to what they've read, so that students get used to the idea of their written work having an audience. And of course, it goes without saying that that comment should always be positive and constructive. As a possible follow-up, after class, students can work on what they wrote for the free writing task and rewrite it, making improvements to the grammar, vocabulary, spelling, etc. If they have a model, they can compare it with their own text and see how else it can be improved. So, to summarize, free writing tasks are a great way of developing our learners' written fluency, because the focus is more on the content and meaning of what they write, rather than its accuracy. It gets them, over time, to build up their writing speed. And without too much focus on getting everything 100% correct, this should build their confidence and remove any inhibitions they have about writing. A task like this reassures them that whatever they write is okay. With regular practice like this over time, they become much more confident writers in English. So now let's have a look at the writing process. Traditionally, writing in class was always very product-centered, and the main emphasis was on the style, organization, and how correct the writing was. Nowadays, we look more towards fluency development, so there should be an initial focus on content and communication of meaning rather than on form. In other words, what someone is trying to communicate in their writing is more important than whether they've used the correct grammar or spelling. Of course, accuracy is also important, but we focus on accuracy on the revision and editing stages rather than make it the focus of the exercise. There is recommended staging on how to teach writing. The stages are here, but they've been jumbled. Can you put them in order? Try this out first before you go to the next slide. And here is the correct order. You might want to start with some pre-writing activities, such as a discussion about the topic that they're going to write about. Brainstorming lexis, so not just vocabulary, but also perhaps expressions related to the topic. Your learners can then plan out what they're going to write, and speaking skills can also be incorporated if they discuss their planning with their peers as well. They can map out what they're going to do, what they're going to write, and in what order. They can then draft the text, which can either be reviewed by the teacher or their peers. After writing the first draft, students can look over their work, which gives them the opportunity to revise their content and check their language. The final version of the text can then be shared with others, which gives them an audience, and it's a vital part of the writing process. What they write about should be seen by more people than just the teacher. so that other students can comment, critique, and compliment. This leads on to the next stages, which are giving feedback on content and communication, first and foremost, as this should be considered the most important, followed by feedback on the accuracy of the language used.
There are several reasons why students should learn to self-correct. First, it trains them to listen to and rely on themselves. Too many students rush through the work without even taking a few minutes to gather their thoughts. It helps them to take responsibility for their learning. The teacher is not there to correct them all the time, and they can't possibly correct every single mistake. It helps them gain a better awareness of the language. They're not just copying things or echoing things, but they actually start to better understand how the language works and use it in a more authentic and personal way. Self-correction also makes students more autonomous in their learning. We want this so that they can become increasingly less dependent on the teacher. Self-correction can also boost students' confidence. When a teacher corrects a student, this mistake is singled out, and the more a teacher corrects someone, the more aware they are of their mistakes. The more their confidence can suffer as a result. But by self-correcting, students are taking charge. Also, self-correction allows students to identify their own problem areas. Some might come to realize they always make verb tense mistakes, and others might see that they need to improve their vocabulary and word choice. The downsides to student self-correction are it can take a lot of time. Students might think that correct language is incorrect, or the opposite. They might not be able to spot the mistakes in incorrect language. Also, their fluency might suffer as a result of them focusing too much on self-correction. Another way of monitoring students' written work is to use peer editing, where the writer and helper work together on a given written task. The writer and helper can look at the draft together and both think of what improvements are needed and use a highlighter to focus on the areas that need work. They should first look at whether the ideas and meanings are clear, and then consider the writer's use of lexis, grammar, and punctuation. The draft should be checked more than once, and each time they look at it, they should focus on a different criteria. To provide scaffolding for the students, teachers should encourage the writer to ask himself or herself the following questions. So the first thing is to concentrate on the ideas and meanings of what they've written. Does the helper understand what I want to say in my writing? Then look at the order. Does my writing have a clear beginning, middle, and ending? Then we focus on the lexis used. Did I use the words correctly? Are they interesting? Did I spell them correctly? And then focus on grammar. Are the sentences written correctly? And finally, did I put punctuation in the right places? The order of each question shows the ranking of importance of each criterion. The first question being the most important and the last being the least. Questions 1 and 2 are the most important questions that the writer and helper should pay attention to while editing the written product. With these questions in mind, the helper marks any areas the writer has missed, and the writer can make any additional suggestions about changes based on his or her own reflection of their writing. The pair discusses the best corrections to make and when an agreement is reached, the new version is inserted into the text, preferably by the writer. If the pair has any doubt about spelling, they can look at a dictionary. So the helper essentially takes on a teacher's role during peer feedback. Their job is to offer not just suggestions and corrections, but also compliments. It's important to compliment the writer in order to give them some encouragement and to boost their confidence. The helper should mention some things they liked about the writing. Perhaps the story was funny, or they used some really interesting or colorful adjectives. Then they should make specific suggestions about meaning, so is it easy to follow, organization, use of details, and word choice, and finally mark some corrections in their spelling, grammar, and punctuation. So what are the benefits of peer feedback in writing classes? First, it provides a bit of diversity with teaching compared with the traditional way of giving teacher feedback all the time. In peer feedback sessions, students do not just listen to teachers' instructions, but work with their peers to do more practice in writing. In this case, students' anxiety can become lower and learning motivation can become higher. Second, sharing opinions with peers is helpful in building and increasing students' confidence. Both writer and helper have to clearly express what they're trying to say, and this requires confidence and knowledge. The helper, giving useful feedback, strengthens not only the writer's confidence, but also that of the helper by being able to successfully communicate their own ideas. On top of this, peer feedback helps students to take more responsibilities in the learning process. Students have to read each other's work carefully so that they're not only responsible for their own work, but also for others. Peer feedback also allows students to interact with their peers and helps develop social skills while also learning the material more effectively. Learning by peer feedback gives students more of an opportunity to work as a unit instead of individuals working alone. Working in groups gives students more useful life skills that can help them prepare for the future. Peer feedback also gives more control to the student. They can decide if they want to use the suggestions that their peers are giving them or not. When they're given options, students are more likely to give and absorb more feedback. Students that have increasing responsibilities have more drive towards their work, and their confidence increases. I mentioned earlier that peer feedback reduces writing anxiety, and in effect, this can improve the quality of their writing. Students' awareness of their mistakes through their friends' opinions and the collaboration process can help reduce anxiety. Peer feedback can raise students' awareness of the similar difficulties and weaknesses in writing that their peers also encounter, and this eventually motivates and builds their self-confidence. Peer feedback can effectively work together with teacher feedback for students to produce high-quality writing. It also gives the students an audience for their writing, which increases their motivation and confidence as well. When they have multiple peers providing them with feedback, the quality of their writing can improve and can also help reduce any initial apprehension that they might have in writing in English. However, there are some drawbacks of peer feedback too. Some studies have found that teacher feedback has more influence on students' writing work than peer feedback. Only about 5% of peer feedback influences the work. Students respect and respond more to their teacher's feedback rather than their peers, and they often take peer feedback for granted so that they do not make corrections based on it. So
The teacher's strict requirement on students to do revisions is crucial for how students treat either teacher feedback or peer feedback. In addition, some students actually lack the ability to give peer feedback because they don't have enough knowledge. In this case, it's hard for some students to learn from others, so peer feedback loses track of its original rationale to help the other improve.